Okay, well, we have a nice little crew here in the conference room. We are in the Gospel of John. We're starting about halfway through chapter 5. We'll get through chapter 5 and into as much of chapter 6 as we can. So, yeah, a couple themes to just be noticing is that Jesus is really trying to reveal what God is like. And in John, he's not nervous about sharing that he's comes from God to teach people. And there's over and over, we just see how a lot of people they don't get it. They're so focused on sort of black and white things, and they take him too literally when he's trying to be symbolic, and they miss the forest through the trees a lot. And it's, of course, how we can be, right? So,
oh yeah.
So we're at John 5. Maybe we'll start with 19. And does anybody want to read? You can just start, and I'll tell you to stop when we have something we got to talk about.
19?
Okay, I'll start. Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing on his own, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, the Son does likewise. The Father loves the Son and shows him all that he himself is doing, and he will show him greater works than these, so that you will be astonished. Indeed, just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so also the Son gives life to whomever he wishes. The Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son, so that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Anyone who does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. Very truly, I tell you, anyone who hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life, and does not come under judgment, but has passed from death to life." Can you stop there?
Sure.
Okay.
Passed from death to life is supposed to remind you of the Passover, the blood on the door. So, and this is interesting because we hear the word judgment. Whenever we're in the Gospel of John, it's reminded that God isn't here to judge the world. People reveal themselves when they're in the presence of Jesus. They cast their own judgment. Jesus doesn't say, "You're blah, blah, blah." They reveal that themselves by how they respond to what he's doing. Because Jesus is just doing the kind of work God would want to do, is amplifying what God does. Forgiving, welcoming, treating people with worth, healing. This is godly work. And the way people respond says where they're at. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't have to say, hey, you're on the wrong path. They're revealing it themselves. Okay. Any questions or thoughts?
No?
Okay. Let's keep going. 25.
Very truly, I tell you, the hour is coming and is now here, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For just as the Father has life in himself, so has he granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to execute judgment, because he is the Son of Man. Do not be astonished at this, for the hour is coming, when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and will come out, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. I thought we should talk about that.
Okay, we can talk
Because
about that.
verse 29, two things come up. All of a sudden now, this is not to contradict what you said, but all of a sudden now the Son has the authority to execute judgment. Okay? That's the one thing. And then to be clarified, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. Sounds like, well, I'm a good person. I'm doing what's right. I fast twice a week and I give a tenth of all I have. Remember that story in Matthew?
Yeah.
Or is it Matthew? Yeah. So I do all that good stuff.
That doesn't mean you're going to go to heaven.
Well, but see, if I take those verses, what does that mean? I've done good, haven't I?
To you.
Well, no, because this is according to the Bible. You see?
Yeah. I don't.
Bible and all our traditions, because we've talked about this for hundreds of years. You know, as rabbis, and we've rabbled about it. That's what rabbis do, they rabble about stuff. But back to your issue again, we know what God requires of us.
According to the law.
Yeah, well, that's what we were here for.
Yeah, but the law.
The Torah.
But Jesus did away with the law.
Oh, well, see, we don't know that part. We just know what God
Well,
requires
we're reading
of us.
John, now we do.
Well,
What was that like? I come not to destroy the law, but to, what was it?
Fulfill it.
Fulfill
that's
it.
Yeah. But see, I don't want to hear that. Because to fulfill the law means you don't heal on the Sabbath. You know,
Oh, but
you don't let a guy pick up his mat and walk. I'm reading the story ahead of it.
he did everything he wanted on his way.
You know,
He
sure,
wandered and did his thing.
Sure, he wandered, and he wandered in his own way, not God's way. You see, I could argue that.
But he was God.
Well, see, I don't know that. I just know God. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's what I know.
Whoa, you're stuck in the law.
If I can, go ahead,
I would say
Kirsten.
like this one bit, Jesus contradicts himself.
Yeah.
So it reminds me of, I think it's Walt Whitman, do I contradict myself? No, it's not Walt Whitman. Who is it? Do I contradict myself? Very well, contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes.
Yeah.
But Jesus does that too, all the time.
Yeah.
He's
No,
so confusing.
I'm just playing the devil's
Sure, we're
advocate
talking
here.
this a lot.
But I am seriously asking, because you mentioned earlier, if we take things literally, well, I've done good, I'm going to go to the resurrection of life.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm reminded of is we impose on the Bible, our 21st century, we impose 2,000 years of Christian theology that John, the writer of John, would not recognize. One of the hardest things that for us to do is to take the gospel for what it was trying to say originally. And as I mentioned this morning at the 8:30 service, sin in the Gospel of John has nothing to do with morality. It is to do with your relationship with God.
Yeah.
And if we read that every time in the Gospel of John, it's going to be a challenge because we're always going to go back to, original sin and these sort of concepts that this writer didn't know about. So we do the same thing with the words resurrection of life and resurrection of condemnation. That's not heaven and hell. He doesn't talk about heaven and hell. That was a very, very, that was a thread of an idea in the early Christian church. It was not the main concept.
Wasn't the main thing, yeah.
And so too with talks about judgment and things like that. So I find it interesting is I do the same thing. I take sort of like what traditional mainstream Christian theology in the last few hundred years says and put it right back on here. If we just hear what he says, another way to look at it is to say, those who see the good that God is doing in the world will naturally be drawn to that, and that will bring life. And those who cannot even see the good that God is doing in the world as good, but maybe even call it evil, well, how are we what can be done, right? That was in a completely other gospel where it says, those who blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, that's kind of like the worst sin. And someone was really worried about that, and I said, it just means that if you cannot even see the forgiveness and the grace and the love and the mercy and the resurrection and the healing that God is doing through the Holy Spirit as good, and you look at it and you see it as evil, you're in a bad way. And it doesn't mean God can't ever get to you. It just means that at this point, you so don't understand it that you are in your own hell, maybe, so to speak.
I wish we can create for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that you do see that sometimes where there will be something beautiful or heartwarming and good that happens, and you'll hear someone comment about it in a very negative way, and you go, how?
No.
How is your world so twisted that you see compassion as pathetic or weak or something?
Well, it's a lot like when we see people taking in refugees, and people are complaining about these refugees coming in and taking away all our jobs, taking away all of our resources, and it's like they are taking up a minuscule amount of what we have here, and we are showing compassion, or at least the person who is working with them is showing compassion. How is that? How can that be evil? How can that be so vile in some of these people's eyes?
No. The studies have been done. My son told me we had to talk about this a while back. All these states that have depended on migrant farmers coming up from Mexico have suffered. They don't have
Exactly.
enough workers to pull the crops. And people like me don't want to do all that hard work. We don't want to toil in the field all day long, picking stuff by hand, so it's perfect when you find it on, whatever. Yeah, and so there's that side of the story that isn't in the news, because the other rattling, that other saber that you just described,
Yep.
makes more news and sells more papers. But it's been demonstrated, the studies have been done. So there's two sides to that story.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true.
They take in the work that we don't want to do.
Yeah. I
Or
mean,
the
you
work that
talk
we
about
don't
the
value,
stuff in the
too.
fields, and then also a lot of these janitorial positions that get filled by
Yes.
immigrants who or people who are just out of school. But yeah.
Yeah, I remember years ago at the nursing homes when immigrants started serving clients, residents, and the residents didn't like that. They didn't,
Okay.
It's true.
and
They still don't.
no, and it's just that, well, us whiteys weren't stepping up to the plate. We weren't applying for those jobs.
Yeah.
We weren't getting the training. We weren't applying for the jobs, and that's the reality.
Yeah.
And we as a culture don't value those jobs either.
No.
Yeah.
I
I
hear
mean,
over and over these people like, well, why are you complaining about such poor pay? You should have gotten a better job.
Yeah,
It's-
should have gotten a better job.
and then why is everybody so lazy they won't do
Yeah.
this job?
Yeah.
Or say those same two things at the same time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just an irony, but again, I thanks for springboarding this far, but I just wanted to raise that, because I'm trying to pick up on what you said. If we take things literally, what does that mean? And I understand in the I remember the training too. The Gospel of John is, if I sin, is because I don't believe in Jesus and all the good he's doing.
But this still is a good paragraph also, because Kirsten pointed out that Jesus contradicts himself in this very paragraph, where he says that the hour is coming and is now here when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. But then a few sentences later, he is saying that for the hour is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice, and will come out. Those who have done good is the resurrection of life, those who have done evil to the resurrection of damnation. So it's like,
It's
the hour is here, but the hour is coming.
Well,
I can see the people going, which is it?
well, I'll really try this on. It's called the eternal now.
It's timey-wimey.
Tell me why you Dr.
Well, no,
Who
it
in the
makes
second-
sense, because if God has a different relationship to time, they could both be true.
Yeah, it's called I was taught it's called the eternal now.
Which
Yes.
probably is easy for us to accept now, 2,000 years later, when Jesus still hasn't come again.
Yes.
Back
Yeah.
then, I'm sure it was a little more annoying. Well, when is he coming?
Yeah.
It's been 30 years now.
No.
2,000 years, like, really?
Okay. Do you want me to go on?
Yeah, keep going.
I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just because I seek to do not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. If I testify about myself, my testimony is not true. There is another who testifies on my behalf, and I know that his testimony to me is true. You sent messengers. I'm having a problem with these glasses. You sent messengers to John, and he testified to the truth. Not that I accept such human testimony, but I say these things that you may be saved. That's another good thing we could say.
That's a really interesting
What does
one.
that mean, to be saved here in John?
Mm-hmm.
He was a burning and shining lamp, and you were willing to rejoice for a while in his light. But I have a testimony greater than John's. The works that the Father has given me to complete, the very works that I am doing testify on my behalf that the Father has sent me. And the Father has himself testified in my behalf. You have never heard his voice nor seen his form, and you do not have his word abiding in you, because you do not believe him whom he has sent. Is that enough?
And if sin is being out of relationship with God, and he's harped on how if you believe you'll have eternal life, and then here we get Father's been talking to you and you haven't been listening.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost like a slap in the face all of a sudden. This must have been really hard to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, remember maybe this is really good to know that this comes after the story of Jesus healing the man, and he's speaking, it's part of the discourse where he's speaking to the religious leaders. And obviously other people are listening in too, and this may get more universal, but there's a criticism here. God is most critical of those in power. And I think that's really important to remember, that whenever the prophets or Jesus speaks harshly, it is to those who have power to hurt and to harm and to help. And when they're not doing their job, especially when they're not doing their job thinking they're following God, that's when Jesus gets most upset. So if this feels harsh, I think it's really helpful to remember that he's speaking to like bishops and pastors rather than
Common people.
Yes.
people who really just needed guidance. They needed help and they needed guidance.
I need to join the feedback. Someone wants to take.
Oh, you gotta
Sure.
go
Yep.
practice. Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah,
Bring
thanks Jacob for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
And I also want to point out too that it feels sometimes like in the Gospel of John that Jesus is saying, and a lot of people have used the Gospel of John to say, well, if you're not a Christian, if you don't believe that Jesus is your Lord and Savior in the way that we understand it, then you must be going to hell. And that phrase is imposing a lot of current theology back on this gospel.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what Jesus is saying is, look, I am revealing God. Can you see through my actions the good that I am showing of God? If you don't believe that what I am doing is revealing God, that's troublesome. Can you see how that puts emphasis away from, tell me I'm the Son of God or you're going to hell?
Yeah.
There's this joke, you know that old picture of Jesus knocking on the door?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this joke that points out the how poor some of the theology might sound. Jesus knocks and says, "Hello, can I come in?" And the person on the other side of the door says, "Why?" "To save you." "From what?" "From what I'm going to do to you if you don't let me in."
Yeah, there you go.
And you're like, well, why did you come if all you're going to do is say, "Here I am. Now believe in me or you're going to hell"? Then that's really not helpful. I think Jesus is doing something more than that. And if you see the work of God, you can come to church every Sunday and raise your hands to Jesus, but see God working in this world and call it evil. And is that not the same as what he's saying here? So it's not so much about Jesus, the person, as it is about what he was trying to reveal and show and get people to understand, get them connected. So to me, I think that's really helpful, is it's a little bit more broad.
The other thing I'm recalling
Mm-hmm.
is that more books have been written about the Gospel of John and continue to be written about the Gospel of John because we discuss these nuances, which we're discussing here.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't know if it's because the way we're wired differently and we see things differently or whatever, as we continue to debate so much of this. And so that there will be those who just said, no, it is this way. If you do not believe, you are going to hell.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
And they are secure in that belief, and they believe they are correct,
Mm-hmm.
and they also think they're loving in that belief
Mm-hmm.
and act out of love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just pointing that out.
Yeah.
And then there's Pascal's wager to throw on top of that. The people who will say, well, what if that is true? I better follow that just in case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
yeah, but see, we could say the same thing. That's why it becomes almost a mute discussion in some respects. Yeah. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm just aware of this. But what am I supposed to do with it? Pretend I know something, so I share it. But it's the reality that we're dealing with. And so that's how, we and others could have real good discussions, and we could have all of our books, and we'd both go away saying they were wrong and we were right.
I mean, we don't get to find out till the end, if even then, which
Well,
of us is right.
Mary and I talk about it this way. God's been laughing at us for a long time because we get hung up on points that really don't matter,
Mm-hmm.
That is true.
but they matter to us for some reason, and we can't let go of that, whatever that is.
One of the things that we have neglected in maybe mainstream Christianity or mainstream Lutheranism is intellect is important. Reading the books and everything can reveal really good things. But if Jesus' point is to connect with God, there's a dwelling in God that reveals things. And so for me, that's something I've been working more and more on. And if I sit with an interpretation that feels very confining and judging and divisive, to me, that's not of God. And so I often find that if I'm sitting with God, it opens up more. Things open up more. I have more patience and more grace and more understanding. And so if someone may be comfortable with an interpretation, but if I personally feel that it's shoving me and other people into a box that harms them, I can't be on board with it. I can't be on board with it because it goes against my deepest knowing. And God is there. God is in our deepest knowing. And one of the things that we can do is work to reconnect with that. And that's something the church has not taught us. Why? Because if you all have your deepest knowings and we talk together about that, I can't tell you what to do.
Yeah. Makes it hard to organize.
If I'm the one with all the learning and I tell you what this means, then I have more control over you, and that feels more simple. And maybe we all like that better because it's easy and it's simple. It's a lot.
I don't have to think.
Yeah,
Nobody wants to be wrong, and could you please tell me the right way to live so that I don't go to hell?
it's a lot
Would be
messier
great
if
there was just a simple answer.
yeah, it's a lot messier if we all present different. I feel this and I feel this, and now we gotta sit and talk about it, and we gotta chew on it. We have to test the spirits a little bit and maybe come up with a completely new, beautiful thing. And well, that could
You have
be
to be
scary.
open-minded
Yeah.
of others' views and points.
Does anybody remember an event leading up to 1994 at the Metrodome? Billy Graham had a rally.
I would have been 9, so I don't remember.
I think it was 1994. And I learned more about the way he operated that year. I'll make it quick.
Mm-hmm.
They were in discussion because they knew this was a Lutheran area.
Mm.
So they were in discussion with our Lutheran leaders like Herb Schulstrom and others at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that when Billy, Dr. Graham, excuse me, did his altar call,
Mm-hmm.
he also included affirmation of baptism.
Mm.
Now, to a degree, what did he mean by that? We could argue. But
Lutheran outreach?
again,
He's a Baptist,
it was he's Southern Baptist.
Yeah.
I think
They
recall.
definitely don't do confirmation. They do
No,
baptism
They,
instead.
and you do a believer's baptism, where the baptism is an affirmation of your belief. The belief has to come first,
Right.
and it's the opposite in our
Do it the other way
tradition.
around.
Okay, but again, I'm just saying he did that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, it's just like the Roman Catholic Lutheran dialogue and justification by faith.
Mm.
Is it justification by faith? Father Zimmer used to always add, there's still works there somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Faithful that works is dead.
yeah, that angle, because you have to do something about it. If you believe, you claim you believe, then do something with it.
I think they're talking about the symptom and not the problem, but that's another discussion.
Yeah, but you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
There was movement,
Yeah. Two sides of the same coin.
dialogue. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to continue to finish this chapter 5 because I think this is interesting. Think about Jesus talking to us. You search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life. But it is they that testify on my behalf. Yet, so are we a Bible-believing church or a Jesus-believing church?
And what's the difference?
Yeah. Yet you refuse to come to me to have life. I do not accept glory from human beings, but I know that you do not have the love of God in you. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not accept me. If another comes in his own name, you will accept him. How can you believe when you accept glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the one who alone is God? Do not think I will accuse you before the Father. Your accuser is Moses, on whom you have set your hope. If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you do not believe what he wrote, how will you believe what I say?
That is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your accuser is Moses, on whom you have set your hope.
And this is a lot about the law because the understanding was that Moses wrote the law.
Right.
So if you're living by the law, and that is your highest regard, then Moses is the one that's going to tell you if you did it or not.
Yeah.
So,
Well, like elsewhere in the Gospels, Jesus talks about how the impossibility of really living up to the law. If you put all your hope, if you really believe that what decides whether you live or die is the law, you're going to die.
Well,
Just because we can't help but find ourselves wanting.
yeah. Yeah.
I still like Romans 8, but see, that's Pauline theology, not necessarily Johannine theology.
It's all about relationship with John.
Yeah.
So it's not about works. It's not about, faith and blah, blah, blah. It's about relationship and being one with God and therefore one with our neighbors. So as we go to chapter 6 now, this is one of the few miracles that's in every single gospel. But if you look at little details of what makes this different from the others, it proves what John is trying to say as a gospel. So I'm just going to start reading, and I'll stop and point out a couple things. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up to the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, this is the second one we've had in this book, the festival of the Jews was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, Where are we going to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages could not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, and they sat down, about 5,000 in all. What does it remind you of sitting calmly and coolly on grass? What famous...
Leads me beside still waters.
Yeah.
Mm.
Psalm
Makes me delight.
23. So Jesus is the great shepherd, and we are the sheep. Jesus took the loaves, and when he'd given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. This is sort of like Jesus' version of Holy Communion in this passage. So also with the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over so that none may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed a prophet who has come into this world." So Jesus is the shepherd. He himself is feeding them. What does that say about God?
Yeah.
It'll take care of us. What evokes the manna too.
Yep.
And this is by far the most metaphorical of the books of the Gospels. So there's just tons of imagery pointing back.
Yeah.
This one says about 5,000 in all. The others say besides women and children.
Well, they're just counting the men here.
Yeah, here is he counting old women and children.
They don't care what the
I
women are
don't
doing.
know.
Yeah, but I mean, this one says in all.
In all. Yeah, you're right.
So is that
Right.
including the women and children?
Yeah.
Everyone included.
Yeah, this is the only one that has the little boy. But Jesus himself breaks the bread and says, okay, and he distributes it versus the disciples, because John wants us to understand
Yeah.
Jesus is doing this on behalf of God, that God wants to fill our needs, give us the bread, the most basic thing that we need, and he's revealing that. And of course, then that there's 12 baskets left over. 12 is sort of that number of the tribes, and
Right.
it's sort of like all of Israel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Israel is the 12 tribes, so it's like Jesus has enough to give everyone in Israel to be filled up. And
Well, I just thought of another thing. I was always struck by the fact that it always starts with somebody else's food that they brought along, distributing that. So there has to start with something that came from the people. It's not just magicked out of nowhere. But also, never thought about with the 12 tribes. Could this also be trying to refer back to Abraham? You know, taking his progeny to create the 12 tribes. Here, taking these loaves to create enough to fill 12 baskets, even after everyone was fed. Were they trying to? Because that was a image that they would recognize more than us. I don't know. I hadn't thought that before.
yeah,
I do always like where it has to start with somebody giving up something.
yeah,
That's just a neat bit.
Well,
Yeah.
that fits with some of our discussions about there is enough for all.
Yeah. We tend to think of life as sort of a zero-sum game. Like if somebody else gets something, that's something I couldn't get. But if we all are generous, we could end up with more.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with you. We don't want to do that.
We don't want to, no.
We'd rather
It
throw
goes
it
against the
away.
grain.
We would rather throw it away. We'd
Yeah.
rather put chains in our garbage cans so we're not sued if you get sick.
Yeah.
Things like that. I mean,
We'll spend more money making sure the wrong people don't get
whatever.
welfare than that the right people do.
Yeah.
yeah,
latest thing in Wisconsin, they don't want to have school lunches. They won't accept the federal money for school lunches because it raises them to be lazy or something. I forgot what it was.
I just like them being raised.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's
And they won't be if
it.
they're not fed.
That's it. But I mean, that was this last week. I read about it going on in the Wisconsin legislature.
It's like, is that right?
For real.
Yeah.
They will
Yeah,
not
I
accept the
believe it.
federal food aid money for school lunches because it creates lazy people, or I forgot what it was. It was lazy or, dependency or whatever they were concerned about.
In the long run, that costs society more.
So the children should,
Children should
That's
be
the
hungry.
irony of it.
Yeah.
You're
I
gonna
understand
spend
that.
money.
Yeah, I remember
avoid
decades
injury.
ago, when we hear how do we reform police and criminal justice and all of this, the studies were done years ago, decades ago, that if you invest more in a child when they're young, about their self-worth and value, and they don't have to do things to prove that they're, I don't have to shoot anybody to prove that I'm worthy. We save money in the long run. What does it cost? 80,000 a month. What is it? I think it's 80,000 a year to incarcerate one prisoner in our state. 80,000 a year. So, which would have been cheaper in advance?
taking care of those children.
Yeah,
when they were babies.
that's, so if I'm there for 5 years, that's around $400,000. And even if I'm wrong, that would have been 200,000. Let's say it's half of that. I can't remember. I read too much. I forget the numbers. But the point is, if that investment had been made up front,
It's been proven.
well, it's been you can't say it'd be proven because they argue against it,
Right.
and that's why it hasn't come forward. But it's been demonstrated, let's say. And does that work every time? No. It's just because you're the most loving parents you could be doesn't mean that one of your children won't grow up to be a crook. I mean, that's happened. And we used to blame the parents. Well, no, we can't do that because it's for some reason again. Not all of us are put together the same way.
That's right.
Well, we know if we're taking our nod from Jesus, he wants people to be taken care of, body, mind, and soul, because that leads to abundant life. And he's there to take care of our most basic needs, which is why he says, I'm, the bread of life, I'm the living water. These are the most basic needs. You'd think that if we even pretended to be a Christian nation, which I have a whole sermon about that, we wouldn't have these arguments because we would try to take care of people first. But we're not. We are about money first in this country.
Capitalistic society.
Yep, where you have to earn your place as a human being. And so those who are old, those who are young, those who cannot work very well are lesser human beings and treated as such. And that is just, our actions reveal our values. And so one of the best things we can do if we want to advocate for, quote, Christian values in this country is to listen to the marginalized people, the ones who are hurting, and lift up their voices and speak with them and change things so that they are able to have a full and abundant life. And in this, Jesus feeding all of the people, they were just there, so he fed them because he wanted not just their bodies to be filled, but also he was hoping for their spirits.
Plus,
to
it
be
was a
filled.
miracle for the people. Imagine what I think as we going through this, is to actually be an individual in that moment. I mean, if Jesus fed all these people, I'd be in tears of joy and belief because of the miracles. I wouldn't be, oh, well, I didn't get enough fish, or you got 2 pieces, I got 1. Jesus is the ever-loving, ever-giving, ever-caring God, Son.
Yep.
And the greed is killing us.
Yep.
It's burning our souls.
Yeah.
The next line is kind of interesting too.
Yeah.
When Jesus realized they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. We see he does great things. He can meet all of our needs, and so we want him to keep doing that.
He was
and that's
humble.
not the point.
He was
The point is
humble.
not for him to do all the stuff for us. He wants us to do it for each other.
Yeah, and it isn't pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. That's nowhere in the Bible. Come on.
No.
It's about community. He gets mad at the people in
Believe
power
me.
who could be caring for the sheep, who should be good shepherds, and they're letting all the sheep wander away. So he comes and he brings them back together, and he's like, okay, now take care of each other. And then 10 years later, everyone's wandering around again, right?
Yep.
So it's when you're connected with God, you can't help but see the people around
That's
you
right.
as also beloved children of God. And you want to take care of each other. That's just how it works. And it's just a symptom. When you're not caring for each other, it's a symptom that you're not connected to God. So, yeah, that's why I'm saying arguing about faith versus works is kind of ridiculous, because they're both. To me, that's an old idea. Really, you want to take care of other people.
That's what Luther was getting at.
Yeah, that's where he was trying to go. Yeah.
That's why he made such an big deal about we are to revere and love God. I don't like fear and love God. We are to revere and love God so that we do all these wonderful things.
For God,
Well, yeah.
and not for
Yeah.
ourselves.
Well, but still, it's to do it.
Yeah.
It's love for my neighbor and caring for my neighbor, and yeah.
But we should feel good. There's nothing wrong with feeling good. Because if you're happy, I'm going to be happy. You know, someone came up in line for the healing service with tears in their eyes. Guess what? I got some in mine too, because
Amen.
we're connected to each other. And so when someone's happy, you're happy. When someone's sad, you're sad. So if you help somebody and you feel like you made their life better and you get a boost of joy, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that, because we're connected. So yeah, it does feel good to help. And that's not, we don't have to worry about whether that's our end game or not. I don't know.
Well, it depends on who you talk to. I'm thinking of the world in which we live and what we read about in the news every day. And yeah.
Yeah.
When you help someone and they get rude in response or something like that.
Well, no, it's not just that, but our leadership.
What are you going to say, Jean?
Well, talking about you feel good. If you help make someone happy, it makes you happy. Last week in the mail, I got an envelope, and it was from, well, I'll backtrack a little bit. A cousin had passed away on my mother's side, and when I left home, went to college, I never had much to do with that particular cousin. Well, he passed away, and I don't know much about the family or anything, but I received in the mail, and in the return address, it said the first name, and then Minkle, which is my mother's maiden name, and then her married name. I had no idea who this lady was, but I recognized Minkle, so I figured it had to be. And here it was the daughter of Laverne that had passed away. And she had been going through her parents, her mother had already passed away, her parents' belongings. And she ran across this particular item, and she sent it to me. And she says, maybe somebody in your family would know who it belongs to. And it turned out to be Steve's and my wedding invitation from 51 years ago.
Oh.
And that really made me feel good that she took the time to send me that instead of just throwing it away.
Yeah.
Because she had no idea who I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I thought, that's
Very
not, now I
thoughtful.
gotta, now
Very
I-
thoughtful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought, now, gee, I gotta send her a thank you note to let her know how much I appreciated it. And she took her time to do that.
Yeah.
They have no idea who I am. I don't know who she is, but it was just very nice.
I
Yeah,
love
but you'd
that.
love to hear the story, what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
underestimate those little bursts of joy that we can create in someone. We have a member who will send in their offering in the mail, but they'll send a little note about oh, when I heard your sermon, Pastor Siri, it made me think of this. That just really, I love that because people are listening and hearing and thinking about it rather than just not, right? And there's nothing wrong with getting that affirmation that you're doing something right.
Yeah.
We all need that. We all need
Oh,
the
yeah.
affirmation that our gifts are reaching somewhere and we're doing something right. And I think it's that caretaking. We all deserve to have our needs met, body, mind, and soul, and Jesus came to show us what that felt like, and then we hopefully do that with other people the best we can. So
Yeah.
Okay.